Welcome to Empowered to Grow, the podcast. I am your host, Hanan and Basha, the business doctor. Following our conversations with empowered women who woke up one day and consciously claimed, I am more than enough, I am worthy, I am empowered to grow. And along their empowering journey towards realizing their own potential and their quest for growth, they became a beacon of hope and guidance for others. May you also find your inner power to grow. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to our Unchartered Discussions episode of Empowered to Grow. This is your host, Hanan and Basha. I still have my beautiful friend with me, Dr. Luana Garcia Ozemela. And as previously mentioned, Luana is an experienced economist, and she is passionate about impact development and about representation and about closing the gender gap and the economic diversity. And we've been talking about a lot of these topics that we kind of started touching on them in the first episode. And here I want to kind of delve a bit deeper that we've been witnessing conversations happening a lot more now and coming to the surface about closing the gaps, bridging the gaps, whether we're talking about women in business, whether we're talking about pay equality, whether we're talking about the diversity within workplaces. And these all, well, they've been happening for forever, but we just started saying, okay, let's raise some red flags over here and let's talk about them a bit more. From your perspective, what are the repercussions of the status quo, as in what's happening right now, just resuming as is, or us really looking at how and when and where to start bridging these gaps and start having these, not just conversations, but start actually implementing and executing on making the changes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, this is a crucial conversation, Hanan, and obviously the markets that I can speak more confidently about, that I have some data on, is Latin America and the Caribbean, right? Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know, Latin America and the Caribbean concentrate about 40% of the population is diverse, right? It's either Afro-descendant or indigenous, and obviously more than half of the population is female. Yeah. And at the same time, what we observe is a huge, as much as there has been a huge progress, particularly in gender equality, in the region, in the Latin American region, women now are more educated than men. There has been a huge, significant drop in the gender gap in labor force participation rates today. Right. More than half of the female labor force participate actively in the labor force, is engaged. Obviously, women today in the region are considered the motor, like the engine of the economy, because they make the decision. 80% of homes is women who make the decisions about what to purchase, how much to purchase, etc. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And obviously, in that sense, we would expect that as educational achievements, and it's something similar for Afro-descendants has happened, right? The indigenous populations too, but they still lag behind because there are many laws within the region that limit the freedoms in terms of how dependent indigenous people are from the state. In accessing to capital, etc., and how they use their lands, etc. So the indigenous context is a bit more complex. I'll focus on the Afro-descendant context. Today, there are about 150 million Afro-descendants living in Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's a lot of people. And more than 70% of those are in Brazil alone. So wow. Brazil, 110 million people are Afro-descendant in Brazil. And this is a group that also has seen a lot of advancement in terms of their education. But as much as women and Afro-descendants have really advanced significantly in educational terms. When we look at the labor force, you still see doubling the rates of unemployment in crisis, vulnerable employment, that employment that you have, but anytime soon,
dangerous positions. Okay.
You can lose, etc. And when you look at the positions of looking at boards and executive positions today, only 4% of the Brazilian boards have Afro-descendant, and less than 1% have women Afro-descendant, despite being 54% of the population, right? Represents. So we see a huge disparity. And today, women in general, Afro-descendant or not in Brazil, only about 20% of the boards today are occupied by women. When at the internet, 88% is occupied by women, when at the international level, it's about 20%. So Brazil and Latin America, despite these educational advancements of this diverse group, is lagging behind significantly on the economic empowerment, let's put this way.
Yes, that's
so
true.
The gap that we observe today is really concentrated on this indicate the economic development indicator, right? And then when we look at the options, as you were asking, what are the alternatives, right? In terms of alternatives, obviously, when policymakers think about how do we economically empower people, how do we eliminate this persistent inequality in wages, etc., and in wealth, right? We think of education. Education is the route with which you can economically empower yourself permanently, right? And ascend and have economic mobility. However, what we have also observed, particularly with the Afro-descendant population, is that even after you acquire a high level of education, you still face a huge gap in wages. So what we call controlling for those differences in education, a Black woman with PhD and a white woman with PhD in Brazil, the Black woman will still earn half of what the white woman earns on average, even though they have the same level of education. So in summary, that is to say that education did improve the lives of both white and Black women, but it was not sufficient to eliminate the gaps, the racial gap.
So from that perspective, now we have organizations, worldwide organizations, such as the International Development Bank, and we've got all the initiatives under the World Bank, and we've got all of theoretically, the governmental initiatives on each country level. So who takes the responsibility? Like, is it my responsibility as an individual who has that vision for themselves to, be economically developed and to empower myself economically? And I've gotten all the education certifications and stuff. So is it my job to start working towards that? Yet, again, if I do go to an organization that pays me half of what my colleague would be getting, then is it my job, or is it the government's jobs, or is it the international organizational job? Who has the task to start bridging this gap, to start making it smaller for everyone involved?
Yeah. If we think of persistent inequalities, whose job is it, right, to contribute? I think there are many players, right? I will summarize it at least 3 main players that could contribute to tackling these gaps. The first one is the individual, right? And there is a whole line of work from economists on behavior, right? On how do you tweak and incentivize and provide incentives, etc., for people to assume the right behaviors to invest in their human capital, to make the right choices, etc. So there is a pillar, definitely, there is a role with which the individual needs to assume, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there is also the fact that even individuals that assume the right behaviors and made the right choices, right? And were able to tap into the available opportunities that exist, etc., and funding and this and that, they still face certain what we call structural inequalities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's also called, there is this also called structured sexism, racism, right? That even institutions themselves assume the role as being the barrier to that individual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there is a role as well that institutions must play. And when I say institutions, is the government, the entities that provide services, the entities that make law, the entities that regulate financial markets, right? And the third one is the markets, is the role of the private sector, right? Because the private sector also is the one responsible for allocating resources, who they hire, who they choose to hire. If they have a hiring manager that is racist, sexist, and who has a big network of white men that they can tap into fill the positions that they have available, they are going to do whatever is easier for them. So there is, so I see three main: the individual has a role to play, the institutions have a role to play, and the markets. What is the role of IDB, Inter-American Bank? They play a very small role, actually, if you compare the amount of money that they have available to lend that could be used to influence, to turn people's institutions' arms, right? Because that's what they do. If they want to stimulate climate change financing, they will put certain conditionalities in their loans in order for the institutions that take the loan to implement certain policies that promote what the financial institution wants, right? But if you look at their pipeline, today we have trillions of dollars in the productive sector. But IDB, for example, can only lend 1 billion a year to a certain country, right? Like, so it's, when you look at the scale of influence, of course they have a lot of influence at the political, at the diplomatic, at the, you know,
the overarching, but we don't know if the overarching will actually trickle down or not.
Exactly. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of mayors in Brazil, right? So there is so much that one financial institution can influence at the local level. So, but it's important for them to take a stance, take a strong stance on what needs to be tackled with respect to gender equality, with respect to race equality. And they do have, particularly on gender, you know, all the financial institutions have policies, they have strategies, their lending should be aligned with that. And the SDGs today, the Sustainable Development Goals, you have SDG 10, which is to reduce inequality, race, ethnic, etc. And you have SDG 5, that is for gender, to promote gender equality. And all markets, institutions, everybody needs to be aligned to that today, right? Everybody's aligning itself to that. So yeah, your question is assertive, but sometimes it's important to highlight that there are three let's say angles to the story. A lot of economists sometimes overemphasize the angle of the individual. It's your fault, woman, that you didn't that you are out of the labor force, that you got scarred in your salary because you went on maternity leave. It's your fault.
I
You
was just
shouldn't
about
have
to say,
for
this
so
is
long.
one of the things, one of the
Yeah.
things, excuse me. And this
Sorry.
is one of the things that employers still hold against you when they look at your CV. Oh, there's a gap here of a year,
Yeah.
2, 5, whatever it is. Yeah, I was taking care of my
Oh,
kids and
okay.
family.
Yeah.
And then you start getting questions. I know I was actually shamed by my ex-business partner, where after a 3-hour meeting, I'm like, okay, thank you very much. I've got to go now to pick up my son from nursery. And later he's like, how can you say that to a potential business partner? I'm like, we've been talking for 3 hours. We're done. And yes, I have a life. I have a son I need to pick up, and I have no shame related to that. And I will bring him to meetings if I have to. And I'm still capable and able to do my job. I'm competent to do my job. But this, again, as you said, it's where we start seeing the applications and the influences of that gender inequality, of the the pay inequality and whatever else that comes along with it, with excuses that are just natural and what make up societies. Both of us can't just not be around to raise a child, or I need to amend my work, let's say, not schedule, but even structure, to be able to take care of my priorities and my responsibilities as well. But I don't know when we'll start, or when we'll actually stop bringing these conversations up and saying, oh yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. Because one way or another, I think every woman has some form of a conversation, even if she's not a mother, if she's not married, if she doesn't have this, she still has family, like taking care of aging parents, or she has herself to take care of herself. And I think that is still a part that is taken up a lot of the times against us, rather than.
Yeah. And it's super interesting because there is a study that has shown that and I use this terminology, which is a British economist that introduced, a lady economist, and the scarring effect from you going on maternity leave or you becoming a mother, right? There is a scarring effect that when you analyze and compare to the scarring effect, because some employers say, no, it's the scarring effect of you being out of the labor force. It's not of you being a mother or anything. And it would be the same thing if a man stayed out of the labor force. And she showed that it's not true. When a woman stay for a year on maternity leave, for example, her discount on her, as you go back, right? You should go back on the same pay level, right? As you were before. But no, you have a discount on your salary, right? As you go back to, and when she compared to men who went on military assignment, on other assignment, that they just stayed out of the labor force for the same length of time, they get a reward in there.
Oh dear God.
So it's not the same treatment.
Yes.
Right. It's not the same treatment. So that's one thing that we need to be mindful of. And that's the role of the markets that I was saying, right? The markets. And then to start addressing this, we need institutions, regulators, and all those involved in lawmaking, creating mechanisms and disincentives for that. And that's what we need to keep pushing, and that's the role of policymakers and markets itself. Markets don't need to wait until there is a law saying that you need to apply quotas, that you need to have fairness in your reinsertion. We don't need to wait. You can do those things from today. But the way markets function today, it's still profit driven, profit first, and whoever whatever group has less bargaining power and needs that job are gonna lose out, right? So that's the challenge.
Well, I think we can still, we'll still have the conversations, we'll still advocate, we'll still push. And just like you are doing right now, leading by example, and creating the mechanism or the funding or whatever it is, the channels that is an enabler, an economic enabler for underrepresented targets and groups of people, and hoping that one day we wake up to, or as we wake up to, a proactive rather than a reactive market, and enforced laws and just things that come from the willingness to do better rather than the must do this for not that. Avoiding the punishment rather than looking at what would come out of it that is good for everyone. Luana, thank you so much. I know this is a topic I know that I say this at every conversation, especially the Unchartered discussions, is like, I know we can go on forever, but I also know that your work will continue, and I definitely appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you so much, Hanan. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, threefold: you, the government, and the organizations, and the market within the organizations. We all take responsibility for where we are. We, as individuals, it's about our resolute and our vision to become better versions of ourselves, to empower ourselves towards economic growth, towards professional growth, and towards personal growth. But more importantly, it's about also looking at our resourcefulness and how to employ everything at our hands, and how to get everything we don't have right now to be able to work towards this better future for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, and everything else that comes along with it. Once again, wish you love, abundance, and prosperity. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the Empowered to Grow podcast. For further engagement with a tribe of empowered women, join my Facebook group, Empowered to Grow, or visit my website, www.hananalbasha.com. I'll catch you on the next episode. And until then, know that empowered you empowers others. Love, abundance, and prosperity to you all.